And record. All right, welcome. It's so nice to see you guys. So we're gonna just jump right in, and what I'm gonna do is I'm going to start talking through everything I want to share, and then at the end we'll open it up to anyone who wants to ask anything or give anything that you want to share from what I talk about. We'll have a space for that afterwards. So we will just be going ahead and starting. Okay, brilliant. So as you all know, this master class is about transmuting suffering. And the reason that I chose those words, that title, is because suffering is a word that makes a lot of us kind of freeze up inside. Like, no one wants to suffer. No one wants to see other people suffer. It's very uncomfortable to think about that and to connect into it. And so therefore, because it is something that's really uncomfortable, we tend to try and shy away from our own inner places of suffering, and shy away from places in the world where we see suffering happening, because it's just too uncomfortable. And so what we want to do is, what the goal of this morning is to kind of break that fear and that stigma of suffering and reframe it, because there's a lot of gifts in it, and it can actually be a really beautiful thing. We can choose to see it as a beautiful thing, and that's what I want to share with you all. So the other word that I'm going to use interchangeably with suffering is oppression, because our own inner oppression and outward, like a collective oppression, is what brings us into suffering. And suffering and oppression, those words come from the inspiration for this masterclass, which is the 47th gene key. So most of you know that I love working with the gene keys. A lot of you have done gene key work with me. And the 47th gene key is the gene key that, if you read the notes that I put in the event on the event page earlier this week, the 47th gene key, the shadow of that gene key is oppression, and that gene key itself is called transmuting the past. And it really is kind of one of the major gene keys in our genetic sequence that codes for suffering at the shadow level, and teaches us how to transmute it in the gift and the siddhi, which the siddhi is the enlightened level, and the gift is what we get to learn from it. And so that's the inspiration for this. We're definitely going to talk about the 47th gene key a little bit, because I want to explain a little bit more about it, because whether you have it in your profile or not, it's incredibly powerful to understand. But before we get to it, the biggest kind of overall takeaways when we talk about suffering, and we start to think about, because we're going to start to think about, like, where do you individually have suffering that you don't want to, maybe you're scared to look at, or maybe it's difficult to look at, or maybe you're looking at it but you're not sure how to transmute it. So we're going to start talking about that, and I'm going to invite you to feel into that for yourselves. And the most important reframe for suffering or oppression is that what we go through, the specific lessons, the specific types of oppression that each of us experience, are the specific parts of collective karma that we agreed to transmute, that we agreed to learn from and transmute. And as I say that, I want to be super clear that that's not an excuse for bad things that people do to each other. That's not saying that that's okay. However, we can look at it through this lens and understand it. We can understand it from both the human perspective of people who, so let me backtrack. When we look at people in the world, either world leaders, or we look at just people we know who bring a lot of pain or suffering to the other people around them or to the collective around them. It's easy to think, okay, like how could that person, like how could anyone be that unfeeling, or how could anyone be that evil? Evil is a word that as humans we like to use, as a collective we like to use, and we'll definitely talk about evil itself in this. But one of the reframes for suffering and for oppression that I want to bring in is that everything that anyone does is in some way, shape, or form part of the collective karma that they are here to release. And so again, it doesn't excuse the actual human actions that happen, but it does offer us another reframe for why bad things happen and why people do bad things. For some reason, people are here, so certain people are here to trigger collective karma, and some people are here to really feel that collective karma and release it and transmute it. I definitely don't want that to be a spiritual bypassing kind of statement. It's just another layer that we can add on top of the understanding of what happens in reality as well. Let me know if that makes sense, or if any of that you want me to go over or say in a different way. Feel free to use the chat, everyone who's on Zoom with me as well. Okay, so we can then use that same idea for ourselves in our lives. So this is a reframe that we can offer ourselves from just bad things happen and there's no reason for it. This horrible thing happened to me and there's no reason for it. Okay, that could be, we could live in that space, or we could use this as a reframe to, okay, this was horrible. And this is a place of suffering or oppression that I've experienced. And when I look at it through this gene key, I can understand it as this was part of my soul's evolution, and it's my choice whether I make myself a victim of it or whether I choose to learn through it and transmute it. And that's really the biggest reframe for suffering and oppression, is that things are going to happen. That's part of being human, is that we experience those two shadows. We all experience them, and our choice is to either let that make us a victimize ourselves, or to work through it and decide, not even just work through it, that makes it sound too simple, but decide to transmute it, decide to see it as part of our soul evolution and transmute it. And so that's like the biggest reframe, just to start off with, about suffering. And that's part of how we start to transmute it, is literally as simple as deciding for ourselves that I'm no longer going to victimize myself or oppress myself from the things that I feel victimized or oppressed by. Like, they exist, they're happening. I'm no longer going to allow myself to feel victimized or kept down by those. That's as soon as we can step into that, and sometimes we'll step out of it, right? Like sometimes we'll come back into victimizing ourselves. But the thing is, once we have the awareness that is what we're doing, we can step right back out of it almost immediately. And as soon as we can do that, and the more that we can do that, the more we can keep ourselves in a space where suffering and oppression are not running our lives, and instead they are informing what we're learning, and we are transmuting through them. So I want to talk through a bit of this gene key, because I want you to understand some of where this is coming from in this gene key itself. So the shadow of the gene key, like I said, is oppression. And it is the storehouse of human karma. So this 47th gene key holds all of the human genetic memory, and it holds all of the energy and information that's stored in our non-coding or junk DNA, which is 98% of our genome. And it's the DNA that scientists have no idea what it's doing. It's because why it's called junk DNA. And it's not actually not actually junk at all. And what it is it's holding that human collective karma. And so at the shadow level, when we're because we all have this in, we all have every gene key. There's 64 gene keys. We all have every gene key in us. We just have specific gene keys in our charts that are the gene keys that we specifically work with. So again, whether you have this gene key actually prominently in your chart or not, you still work with this because you're human and you have genes. So in the shadow, the shadow of this gene key forces us or asks us to look at our prime archetypes and fears. And so when we're talking about this shadow, one of the best ways to look and see where you are in the shadow of this gene key, where this gene key of oppression or shadow of oppression is in your life, is to notice what are the archetypes that you live in? What are the archetypes of suffering that you live in? And what are those, what are the shadows from the archetypes? Because this gene key is very much about what archetypes are we identifying with. So I wrote out a few examples I'm going to read. For example, in the shadow of oppression, an archetype you might live in might be sick, or poor, there's not enough money, or I'm unworthy, or victim in general, just like every bad thing's always happened to me. I'm helpless. Those are some big ones. There's lots of others. And as I continue to talk, I want to invite you to feel into what are the primary shadow archetypes that you identify with. That could also, I mean, other ones that could be like antisocial, or even like scared of, anxious of showing up in big groups. Like, for example, if you know that part of your soul path is to be heard and to share different, either your story or your information or your knowledge in some way, and then a shadow archetype could be that like stage fright fear, that fear of like really being anxious about showing up and speaking in front of a lot of people or being in big groups of people. So though there's lots of archetypes that can show up here, I would love you to think about what the big ones that show up for you might be. Feel free to share them in the chat as well, because it can be really helpful to see what other people are coming up with. Can just trigger other like understandings in ourselves of like, oh, okay, yeah, that's one I have too. So another thing about this shadow that is really important is that the way to get out of it is we have to look deeply into our major fears, into our deepest fears. And that's when we start to move into transmutation, which is a gift, which we'll talk about in a minute. And our fear creates the fear of evil. Our fear actually creates evil itself. Evil does not exist when there's no fear. And so this shadow also, it connects us into the fear and the coding for different energies that we talk about, like demons, or shadow energies, or curses, or any kind of like parasitic energy that we think about connecting into and sucking our energy, right? There's lots of stories about like being possessed, all of that. And so I want to offer another reframe for that too, which comes partially from this gene key and also is a shamanic reframe, which is that there's no such thing as a demon, or there's no such thing as evil. There's no such thing as a spirit that possesses you. None of that actually exists outside of ourselves. They exist in the sense that all those things can be present when we are deeply living in our shadows and allowing our shadows to overtake us, when we are deeply living in that collective karma, whichever part of that karma we've agreed to transmute in this lifetime, and we are not transmuting it, we are letting it overtake us, then it starts to feel like there are things outside of ourselves. But there is nothing outside of ourselves. And this is one of the biggest things that I see come up with people, is the fear of like having a demon or a spirit or something connected to them. And there's nothing outside of you. There's nothing outside of you. So yes, it can feel like something's connected to you. But as soon as you recognize that that's just a shadow part of yourself that you're not looking at, and because you're not looking at it, you've pushed it to the side and made it into almost another being. As soon as you realize that, you can integrate it back in and transmute it. And that's true with every single type of evil or demon or et cetera, that we see or feel or talk about. It's all just an illusion in a sense. It's showing us the collective karma that's really present in our space. So when we think about that as well, that's another part of the shadow. That's a part of where we oppress ourselves, and where we feel oppression is in that space of not owning our shadows. And so the biggest thing that this gene key and suffering and learning how to transmute suffering brings to us is to look at our shadows, look at our suffering and our oppression as a reflection. So instead of like trying to get around it, like the first step to transmuting it is accepting it. Second step to transmuting it is starting to look at it like a reflection, like you're looking in a mirror. Like look at that suffering and see, where is that part of me? Where have I made that part of me? Where have I allowed that to be part of my story? And where can I let it go? And so the gift, and what I really want to spend time talking about is transmutation. And transmutation is such a beautiful energy. Transmutation is unraveling our shadow. It's the process of unraveling our shadow to dissolve and to alchemize into who we truly are. Transmutation is how we quantum leap. So this is also the basis of how I perform quantum healing work in the Akashic records, is literally from this gene key. It's not from this gene key, but this gene key explains it so well that when I read this gene key, I was like, oh my God, couldn't be a better explanation of what I'm doing and what I like to teach. So transmutation it starts by going through small little mutations, small little shifts, which are as simple as the ones I've already mentioned. Deciding that you no longer want to be a victim, recognizing where you're making yourself a victim and deciding not to do that, deciding and recognizing where you are holding on to collective karma and deciding to start to walk out of it, recognizing your suffering as part of your path, and instead of making it separate from you, bringing it into you, because once we bring it in, it just starts to release. It's like we keep suffering and oppression around so much longer when we're putting it off to an arm's distance. And as soon as we start to like embrace it into us, we realize that it's just the parts of us that we didn't want to look at, and then we can love that so deeply and let it go. So these tiny little mutations, these little steps that they're not big, they're not difficult. When you break it down into little steps, it's not difficult. When you start to think of like doing it all at once, then it seems difficult. It feels difficult because it's big leaps, big steps. But if you do it small, one by one, little mutations, little changes, then you work up to those big transmutations, which are quantum leaps. So a transmutation is when transmutation happens when you have gotten to a point where you have really understood for yourself, and this takes as long or as short as you need it to take as a human, as a soul. everyone's process is going to be different, but a transmutation happens when you work all the way up, or all the way through your suffering or your oppression, whatever it is that you are moving through, to a point where you just go, yeah, okay, this is over. I don't have to hold on to this at all anymore. And then you get to do this beautiful, incredible thing where you just let it go. That's what a quantum leap really is getting to a point where you realize that there is zero emotional or energetic attachment to an old story, and it just fades away. And when it fades away, your emotional landscape shifts, your energetic landscape shifts, your physical landscape shifts. And that's truly what a quantum leap is. And so that's what transmutation is. And the other really beautiful thing about suffering and oppression, and why we want to transmute it, is because when we feel into it and we allow ourselves to understand it and see it, and really be present with it and work through it and let those little mutations and the big transmutations happen, the more that we unwind ourselves from the old stories, the old collective human karma, from all of the stories that are within our non-coding DNA in our body, the more that we unwind from there, the more we bring ourselves back into the truth of ourselves, the more that we bring ourselves back into our true purpose and into our truest source of consciousness. So the more deeply that we move into the hurt and the pain and the darkness and the scariness and what we like to call evil within ourselves, in our bodies, the more deeply we move into that, the more deeply we transmute it and the more deeply we come into ourselves. The only path to truly understanding who we are as a soul is through the suffering, is through the oppression. And that doesn't have to be a statement that makes you feel, notice if that statement makes you feel scared or victimized, because it definitely can. And also notice that it doesn't have to. That we can see that as a gift, because what we are doing when we are transmuting suffering is we're not just transmuting our own stuff, we're transmuting it for everybody. Like, we're transmuting it for the collective, we're transmuting it for our loved ones. And so the idea behind Gene Key 47 is that each and every one of us comes down to Earth in a human body with specific collective energies or karmas that we have agreed to work through, with a specific mission. Each of us comes down here with a specific mission. And part of that specific mission, and we talk about this, is like our soul path, our soul plan, our soul contracts. And part of that is agreeing to take on some level of human karma, of collective karma, and transmuting it through your life. And it doesn't always show up as collective. Like, that collective karma can show up in your life via your personal relationships, via your family, via your job, via your health, so many different things, right? It's not necessarily that you are thinking, oh yeah, this thing I'm working through is collective. But when you can look at it, when you can kind of zoom out and be like, oh, this relationship I have with my parents, these patterns and archetypes we're playing out, that is a collective pattern that is in so many places, and I'm helping transmute it, right? We can kind of zoom out in that way and see it like that. But we each come down with different collective energies that we are here to work with, and we are here to help transmute. And that's how we discover who we are and why we're here, is we work through those, we transmute that energy. So we're not only helping our own soul evolve, we're also helping all of humanity. We're also helping all of the collective evolve. And that's so powerful. It's so beautiful to be able to do that. And some of us come down with more of a commitment to the collective, and we're releasing this karma than others. And there's no like competition there. It's just some people are here to do a lot of really collective work. Some people are here to do a lot of really individual work. But we do all have some kind of collective work that we do. And so when we are aware of that, when we can reframe everything into, okay, yep, this is happening basically for me and not to me, then we can move through it and accept it all so much more deeply and easily. And then we can learn how to transmute it. So, the last part about the gene key that I wanted to share as well is just the city of the gene key is transfiguration. And in the gene keys, the city is basically a space of enlightenment. It's not a place that most of us will ever like live in, but it's an energy that we can connect into and channel at certain times. So the city is transfiguration, and it's really associated with the ascension and resurrection of Christ, because his life is a mythic enactment of the stages of alchemical transmutation that end in transfiguration. So he, all the trials, all the suffering that he goes through, everything that he goes through up until the very end is basically an enactment of this gene key of transmuting suffering into transfiguration. So the city reveals the purpose of that non-coding DNA, which once we've released collective karma from our non-coding DNA, that all of that DNA then codes for the rainbow body, which is the rainbow body is a very, I mean, it's an ancient idea. It's an ancient concept, and it's basically like full enlightenment, fully enlightened masters, ascended masters ascend into their rainbow body, which is when the body opens up to certain light frequencies. And you know, rainbow as well connects into the chakras, opening up into certain light frequencies, and ascending into this full enlightenment and embodiment. And so the gene key 47 and the city also work with gene key 22, which is the programming partner. Every gene key has a programming partner. And gene key 22, I'm not going to go super deep into it, but gene key 22 is the gene key essentially of the Akashic records. And when you read gene key 22, that's basically, it's what it comes out to. That's basically what it comes out to. It is a gene key that holds, the shadow is dishonor, and it holds all of the human acts that have ever been recorded, and it opens us up in the gift in the city to this like enlightenment. The rainbow body, they work together. 47 and 22 work together to fully open us up to that. And so what's important here, the reason I'm bringing this up is that the only way to really move through into enlightenment, which again, most of us are never going to actually be fully ascended masters. That's not the goal of this lifetime for most of us, but our goal is to, for every soul, the goal is to do as much work and learning and evolving as we can. And so to fully transfigure pain and suffering into beauty, to alchemize it into gold, essentially, is to take on collective karma and ancestral pain and suffering and release it through us. And so that's why we each have specific ancestral collective archetypes that we play out, because those are the things that we have agreed to take on, to learn through ourselves and to work with the collective through. So how do we transmute? So that's why suffering exists. How do we actually transmute it? Transmuting is really easy. It's genuinely really easy. We make it a lot harder than it needs to be. Transmuting, like I said, it starts with accepting. It starts with deciding not to be a victim anymore. And then after that, it moves into the simple process of noticing our stories and questioning them and moving through them. Like, it's that simple. Transmuting is so simple. Some of the easiest techniques. So first off, when we want to transmute, the first technique is to get into the body. And those of you, all you guys who are here live with me right now, have heard me talk about this probably ad nauseum at this point, but getting into the body is the number one most important thing that we need to do to transmute. And so it's grounding. We're going to do a quick little grounding exercise right now to show you what I mean by that. So just go ahead and close your eyes. It's easier I'm just going to explain it as we do it. So as you close your eyes and you breathe into your body, I want you to notice how much of your energy is floating above your head right now. Like, are you halfway out of your body? Are you in your body? Are you like completely out of your body? And I like to visualize this by visualizing like my spirit form. And is my spirit form in me, or is my spirit form like sticking out of me, not fully in me? And so noticing how much you are in your body. And if you are not fully in your body, then you are going to slowly start to pull your spirit form, your energy, all the way down into your body. And pull your spirit form, your energy down through your spine and through the root chakra and all the way down into your legs and your feet. And ground your energy down into your body, down into your feet, and you can move down from your feet like 2 or 3 feet below you to your earth star chakra, and you can ground in your energy there as well to really keep your spirit self, your energy in your body. And we're not going to go any deeper than that. We don't need to go to the center of the earth to ground. We just need to get our energy into our body. But with your energy now in your body, here's one of the easiest ways to transmute. Bring your energy into your body like we just did, and then bring your attention to any place that you feel any kind of pain, discomfort, anything that doesn't feel quite right, anything that's pinging out at you in your body. Bring your attention there. And you're going to just breathe into that space, and you're going to ask it, what is being held here? And this is where, if you've worked with me a lot, you've heard me say this before, and ask, what is being held here? Truth, truth, truth. And feel how that releases. Even if you don't get an answer about what's being held there, just by focusing in on any place in the body that's holding any kind of tension, any place that we're holding tension is a place that we're holding some kind of collective energy or some kind of personal energy, which connects into the collective in some way. And just by breathing into that space and going truth, 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 starts to release. So easy, so fast. Truth, truth, truth. And you can also feel into your body and call in. Let's just call in this space. Another way to transmute the collective or ancestral energy that you're holding in your body, asking it to come forward. It's as simple as asking it to come forward. And asking it, what exactly am I carrying? Truth, truth, truth. Asking your ancestors, what am I carrying in my body? Asking your soul, what collective energy am I here to transmute? And noticing that whatever comes up, whether it's answers, whether it's emotions, whether it's just feelings of any kind, you can breathe through those and say, thank you. And I no longer wish to carry this. I ask it to release fully. So like, as I do that in my body, I'm feeling a little bit of like pressure coming up in my chest, in my heart. So what I do with that is feel into it and ask it, do I need to know anything else? I get, yes, it's ancestral. Okay. And then I ask it to leave. I acknowledge it. I acknowledge that I've been holding this for my ancestors. And now it gets to leave. And I ask it to leave. And so noticing where anything maybe is coming up for you, that you can do the same. Perfect. So that's one of the easiest ways to transmute. Another way that you can tap into transmutation is noticing, again, what stories, what archetypes, what places of victimization do you consciously or unconsciously, generally it's unconsciously, bring into your life and live through and by. And every time you notice those beliefs or stories coming up in your conscious or your subconscious, you question them. You ask them, why are you here? And you tell them, you can go. I don't need you here anymore. The more that we question and notice the stories and the archetypes that are coming up for us, that we live in, the more that we are aware of that, the more we can ask them to leave and release those old stories, those old archetypes. The more we question them, the less power we allow them to have over us. So, for example, the reason I came into this work, as many of you probably know, is via illness. And I was very sick, and I was very deeply in stories and archetypes of being the sick girl, of being, my body doesn't work, of this is how it is. No one understands me. No one understands what I'm going through. This is my life. I'm always going to be sick. My body is never going to work. I was so deeply married to those stories, so deeply married to those stories. And I was like, that's who I am. And that's all this is going to be. That's what my life is. No one can actually help. Wasn't consciously aware of how deep those stories were, but those stories were definitely there, believing that this was just my hand I'd been dealt, and that's what it was. And that is 100% an archetype of suffering. And it was true for a really long time because I decided it was true. This is where we are so powerful. This is how powerful our mind and our decisions and transmutation is, because as long as I decided that that was true, it stayed true. I could have decided it was true for my entire life and it would have stayed true my entire life. I probably would not have survived, honestly, if I had decided to keep that true. As soon as I decided that, as soon as I started to realize how much I was holding and started to put words to it, started to actually look at the really uncomfortable, traumatic shit, honestly, that I was holding there, that was keeping that as an archetype that I was so deeply committed to. I mean, never have I been more committed to anything in my life than I was to deciding to keep myself in the suffering of being sick. As soon as I started to look at that and realize, I'm deciding this. And this is being held, I'm holding on to this. And it's in my Akashic records that I'm holding on to it because I'm holding on to this old energy in my records. I'm holding on to this old energy in my body. And as soon as I became aware of that and started to question it, I mean, a lot of you know my story. I went into remission in 30 minutes. I questioned that for several weeks. I was doing the work of working through the suffering, working through my archetypes and stories and noticing where they were showing up for me. I was doing that. And then I was able to, I'd been doing tiny little mutations. And then I was able to have a big transmutation, a big quantum leap. And so it's that simple, honestly. I mean, and that's also difficult. It's simple and difficult. It's a paradox because it's not easy to look at our stories. It's not easy to look at the suffering that we are inflicting on ourselves. That's perhaps the most infuriating part of this, not just this gene key, but even just transmuting suffering in general, is that we inflict it on ourselves. I mean, we choose what we're coming with. If you believe that we choose what to come into in this life, then we choose the suffering that we want to work through. We don't always choose exactly the ways and whens and hows, right? There is free will. There are things that people, I believe that certain like horrible, violent acts that people perform against others are not necessarily soul contracts. Those are more just people really deeply in their shadows and acting from them. But we choose our overall themes, essentially. What I'm trying to say is we don't choose necessarily the details of our life, but we choose the overall themes of the suffering that we are here to work through and to be in. And that's perhaps the most infuriating thing sometimes, is realizing that we then therefore choose to stay in it. It's all a choice. And that's where we come back to free will, is that if we have free will, then all the suffering we experience is on some level a choice. Again, not trying to use that or wanting that to be any kind of spiritual bypassing of real current events in any realm, right? Or what we really experience in our lives. It's just another way to think about it. It's a way to try and reframe what's going on personally, collectively, to take back power. Because the biggest thing we do with suffering is we give our power away to it, and we give our power away to anything that makes us feel like we're suffering. And then as soon as our power is gone, we can't transmute it. So that's why the first step to transmuting suffering is to bring back your awareness into yourself that of where you've allowed yourself to be a victim, where you've identified as a victim, so you can then decide to move out of that identification. Because as soon as we move out of the identification of being a victim, then we bring our power right back into us. So that's why it's so important. And that's why that is step one. So with all of that being said, I want to invite you all to have a little discussion about anything that I've brought up here. So if you want to, again, we are live and being recorded. So if you want to unmute yourself and turn on your video and talk, you're welcome to. If you want to just put something in the chat, either on Facebook or on Zoom, I have both up. Please feel free to. But I would love to hear anything that you are taking away from this, any questions you have, anything I can explain better, any place that even any like places that you're becoming aware of for yourself, where maybe you have stories that keep you in different forms of suffering. Like, what are your archetypes? What are your stories? Anything that you'd like to share or bring up. Just want to leave some space right now. We have about 10 minutes to do that and talk through that.
I don't think my video is working, but I could share. I definitely resonate with what you said about at some level, you keep or you carry your suffering, or that you can do that. I definitely have like vivid recollections of thinking to my own self, like, am I ever not gonna subconsciously or consciously like introduce myself as like, hi, I'm Chelsea, like I'm fucked up in so many ways. Like I remember sitting outside like before going into an interaction with a group of people or something and just be like, is there ever a time in my life where I'm not going to feel like that's the version of the person that I'm, like introducing or portraying to other people? So I definitely resonate with that. And then the idea of like not on like a physical level as well, kind of just being like, well, this was the, shit hand that I was dealt, and kind of a more like it's not fair type of thing versus, what about this am I somehow contributing or am I carrying on some level, which I've noticed more by doing this work probably the last few months. So yeah, definitely resonated with those things that you said.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that too, because the last bit that you said of especially like the physical aspect of it, there's like this fine line of, how do you want to say this, like it's almost like with anything physically happening, part of the releasing of it is just the decision to stop identifying with it. And that's where we perpetuate it. So with physical things, the way I like to think about it is, it's not that like, we are asking to have anything physically happening. But when we just accept it as our reality, and this is what I've been obviously found to be true for myself, hearing this kind of energy from what you're saying, and also have heard this from a lot of other people after doing this work as well, is that when we realize or accept that like we're feeding into the story on to a certain extent by deciding to identify with it, that's when we can release it. Like that's where the releasing comes. That's where the like transmuting comes. So yeah, just
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And it's like I said, it's simple, but it's not easy. I think maybe that's an important aspect to add, is that it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. Because it's simple to realize that's what's happening, but it's not necessarily easy to shift it out.
Yeah, I think that you definitely have to, there's some point where some little click, or like you said, maybe small, tiny transmutations, where there's an idea of how could I be contributing to this or that I could be contributing to this. You know, there's at some point where there's a little shift where you say, you know, I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I probably have, like in a similar way. Like I literally remember like thinking of the title for my book that I was going to write, of like how the process of dying, you know, like how you feel just so awful. And like I was writing, you know, like brainstorming titles for a book before it occurred to me at all that like some part of that was me and my story, that I was already kind of, you know, that, if that makes sense, like where I was already into that, like that was already what I had decided was my, you know, like future, and something I thought, oh, well, this is what I'm going to leave with society. Like, I don't know, you know, it's just interesting that that thing had happened to me or occurred in my brain first before the idea of maybe that doesn't have to be my story, you know. And there's a part of it that's empowering to kind of say like, there's a little bit of empowerment, or a decent amount, I think, if you can say that some of this suffering or some of it I could have something to do with, and versus it being like blaming yourself, it actually being a little bit more empowering, like, well, if I have something to do with it, then I have something to do about it, type of thing.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And that's like, that's one of the biggest takeaways I want people to take from this. So I love the way you put that, love the way you put those words together. Because that's exactly it. It's like realizing that, yeah, I do have something to do with it, which means I can undo it. And thank you for sharing that too, your story there for everyone to hear, because I mean, God, that's how powerful our stories are. And I mean,
Yeah.
In my own way, that was where my story, I was like writing that kind of story. I wasn't actually like writing it down or thinking about like a book title, but in my own way, I was thinking, okay, well, this is going to be, you know, the story of how Shannon dies. And like,
Yeah, totally.
and I was, and until I got out of that, just like you're saying, until you get out of it, we're writing that story for ourselves.
Oh yeah, total, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's where we write our suffering for ourselves. And as soon as we realize that, it's like, oh, okay, I can undo this. It's so empowering. It's so like, wow, okay, I have so much power. I could put this together in my mind and I can undo it in my mind.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's transmutation. Literally, that undoing is transmutation. Transmuting it. Yeah. Anything else? Any of you guys want to share, bring up before we close? Okay, in the chat. Okay, so I think this is so important because I think so many of us hold this archetype. So thank you for sharing this. So I'm just going to read the message. One of my archetypes is I will never have enough money, and I'm always struggling with money. I need to work hard to make money, and it will never be enough. And so you said your left shoulder and arm is where the pain showed up. Work hard to make a little bit of money. And so that's such a big story that thank you for sharing that, because I think pretty much almost every human has that in some space. Societally, that's a story that we are taught, and that's a societal, that's collective. That's a collective story. That's a place where pretty much all of us hold some aspect of that collective karma, of that collective story, that making money is difficult and needs to be a lot of work and needs to be and there's never going to be enough. And so when we can find that in the body, like you found for yourself, shoulder and arm. Okay. When we can find that in the body, then we can start to find that story and unravel it in the DNA. We can start to unravel it through our body. We can start to unravel it through everything that we're feeling. And we can start to decide, we can figure out, where am I buying into that story? So if this is resonating with anyone here, anyone listening, anyone receiving this is a good place to ask the question of yourself of, where am I accepting that story as truth for myself? And this is one of the first ways that we start money work, is noticing the stories that we're holding, noticing that archetype, and noticing where we are contributing to that story staying in our minds. And the way I would recommend transmuting this, or one of the ways, is with questioning the beliefs every time they come up. Every time a belief about money comes up, taking a second, sitting with it and going, truth, truth, truth. Is there any truth to that? And realizing probably almost immediately, no, there's not truth to that. Truth, truth, truth. Is there any truth to that? No. This can be let go, letting it release from the body. That's a big story, a big archetype. Thank you for sharing that, because again, I think probably everyone can connect to that in some level. We have so much collective programming around money, and money can be a really beautiful, loving, wonderful energy. The way that we allow it to be is by noticing the stories that we are perpetuating for ourselves about it, and not shaming ourselves for those stories, but just noticing them and deciding, I don't want that to be my story anymore. If I'm this powerful, then I don't have to let it be my story anymore, right? And we are that powerful, so we don't have to let it be our story anymore. So I really appreciate that one. That's a big archetype. That's so important to breathe out, let it go from the body, let it go from our stories that we tell ourselves. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. And the last thing that I wanted to share here is that this gene key and transmuting suffering and transmuting in general, like everything that is shared here, the next step to going deeper into it is using the Akashic records, because again, gene key 47 and gene key 22 are programming partners. Gene key 22 is the gene key of the Akashic records. Gene key 47 is the gene key of suffering and oppression, and moving out of it into transmutation. And so the Akashic records in the quantum healing process that I use in the Akashic records is basically going through and transmuting all the collective stuff that is held in our DNA. It's working with that quote unquote junk DNA in the 23rd plus dimensions of the records, which is where all this becomes available. It's not really available in the same way in lower dimensions of the records. And so for those of you who want to work deeper, some of you already have access to quantum healing. I do have a course that Healing Inside Out that has my quantum healing process, part of my quantum healing process, because it's expanded since I did that, but it has the basis of the quantum healing process in there that you can do for yourself. Some of you have that. And then Heal, a lot of you probably know Heal is open for round 3, and this round is specifically completely focused on how to heal in the Akashic records using the Akashic quantum healing process, plus there's a whole bunch of new stuff I've been adding to it and channeling and adding to it over the last few months. And so that is open now, and we're starting on March 14th. So there's about 2 weeks before we start. And so if this is something that is really calling to you to learn further about how to go deeper for yourself and how to help others, then please reach out, or I will also leave the application link to Heal in the comments on Facebook for this video, for this live. But that is open, and it is specifically for anyone who is ready to learn how to transmute this fully, and who is ready to learn how to transmute these things for themselves and others. So this is especially for if you feel called to work with other people in this capacity, not exclusively. You don't have to want to work with other people to do quantum healing, but this is specifically to learn how to do that. I'm teaching things that I have never taught before in this Heal round that are not in any of my online courses. There's a whole new there are whole new modules and courses. There's a whole new course just for this group that I'm creating right now. So there's things I haven't taught before that are going to be taught in this. So yeah, really excited. Just wanted to add that to this as well. If you're interested, don't hesitate to reach out. And even more importantly, for this masterclass, please, please, please take the ideas of the reframe of suffering, finding the archetypes for yourself, and these simple little ways to transmute. Because again, transmuting, it doesn't have to be difficult. I mean, it is simple. Sometimes the things we have to transmute are not always easy, but it is a simple process. So taking these simple things that you can do and feel into how can you make those part of your daily practices to transmute deeper and deeper and deeper for yourself, because it's such a powerful, wonderful thing to bring into your life. It is truly life-changing, just these small little transmutation practices, and accepting suffering, not as a bad thing, but as a teacher. So if that's, there's anything you take away from today, I hope it's that. And I just want to say thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining. Thank you for those of you who joined live. Thank you for everyone who's watching later. And if you have questions afterwards, after you've sat with some of this, after you watch it again or watch it the first time or whatever, please don't hesitate to write questions under the live video and the recording, the replay in the Facebook group, because I will definitely be taking a look there and answering anything that comes up. All right. I think we are complete. Thank you all for being here, and I hope to talk to you all soon. All right, bye.